This is Tech Talk with your host, Tom Dioria. Tom will spend the next hour making your life with technology a little easier with explanations of the different aspects of today's technology and how it can benefit your home, small office, or enterprise. Now here's your host, Tom Dioria.
Welcome to IMI's Tech Talk on this, the first Sunday of May 2010. We're on at 6 p.m. in the New York listening area and 3 p.m. in Arizona. And today we're live from our New York offices, and we're going to be discussing net neutrality and the future of broadband with one of our favorite guests, Tony Bradley. I'm Tom Dioria. I'm the CEO of Information Methods Incorporated. And together with our weekly guest, our show will help our listeners, whether business or home technology user, make better use of all aspects of technology. Just in case you're a first-time listener, in our first segment, Tech Talk provides you with a review of last week's most significant events in technology. We start with our increased coverage of New York's technology scene, and we follow this with our industry-wide report, which could contain information on conferences, announcements by vendors, new releases of software equipment, or new contract opportunities. One or more guests follow this from many aspects of business and industry. And if you wish us to consider a topic for a future show, you can email your suggestions to Tech Talk. That's TECHTALK at IMI-US.com. And we'll get back to you pretty quickly. Anytime after our show introduction, please give us a call or send email messages with questions on today's topic or anything else that we might be able to help you with. You can use that email address I just gave you, techtalk at IMI-US.com. Or you can call in at 277-KFNX. That's 277-5369. And if you happen to be outside the 602 listening area, call us toll-free at 1-866-536-1100. You can use that email address, as I said, techtalk at IMI-US.com for questions during the show or after, and we'll try and get you on the show or next week's show. And we're being simulcast on the web, so if you can't get to your radio, you can go to KFNX's website, which is 1100KFNX.com. And if you want to listen to a previous show, we have an archive on our website, which is IMI-US.com. You can click on the Tech Talk button and then the archive button and listen to any of the shows that you may have missed or want to hear again. So please call in any time during the show, and we'll definitely try and get you on. First segment, as I mentioned, is our Week in Review. It's our increased coverage of technology events in New York City and around the world. It's compiled by Dave Brandon and Jose Batista. And we have a bunch of things to tell you from the New York scene. We wanted to tell you that firefighters and U.S. Marines conducted a large-scale drill simulating a response to a terror attack on New York City bus and subways. Thursday morning's drill on the FDNY's Fire Academy on Randall's Island involved the use of burned-out city bus and the fire department's subway simulator. The drill simulated a suicide bombing on a daily bus, chlorine gas leak in the subway, and a building collapse. The idea behind the drill was to coordinate the rescue and decontamination of the victims. The drill was a large part of a week-long effort between the local first responders and Marines. About 200 firefighters and Marines took part in the exercise, and it was a pretty interesting event. We have something here for you from EHS Today. Study of nearly 13,000 rescue workers from the fire department of the city of New York shows that a significant portion who suffered acute lung damage after exposure to the World Trade Center dust have not recovered normal lung function in the years since the 9/11 attacks. So you can go to their website and take a look at that and get a little bit more detail if that applies to you or any of your family here in the New York area. And we also want to report something that happened last week. An Apple engineer lost an iPhone prototype. This is from Breitbart. A 27-year-old Apple software engineer has been outed as the unfortunate employee of the notoriously secretive company who left behind an iPhone prototype in a California beer garden. Technology blog Gizmodo purchased the N-generation iPhone from an unnamed person who was also at the Redwood City bar that night and revealed details of how the device came into his possession. So, too bad for that guy, and I wonder if they tell us anything interesting about that. We'll keep you informed. Let's see, this is from Bottom Line Secrets, which e-reader is right for you. and why you might want to wait to buy one. Apple's well-publicized iPad went on sale early last month, joining Amazon's Kindle, Barnes & Noble's Nook, several Sony offerings, and a host of more obscure products in the increasing crowded e-reader market. Most feature easy-to-read screens and long-lasting batteries. These devices can be money savers for those who read a lot. Digital books typically sell for $10 to $15 compared to $25 or more for hardcover. Which e-reader is right for you depends in part on your priorities. For versatility, buy the iPad. Most e-readers just display books, magazines, and other text files. The iPad is not only an e-reader, it can browse the Internet, access email, display photos, play videos, serve as a digital organizer, and more. Costs about $500 with a 16-gigabyte flash drive and Wi-Fi capability. Goes up to about $830 for a model with 64 gigabytes flash drive and Wi-Fi and 3G compatibility. For affordability, buy the Amazon Kindle, but maybe not yet, according to this. As of late March, the basic Kindle model sold for $260. It's a lot less than the iPad, on par with others less impressive e-readers. But the Kindle's price could head still lower, and we're hearing maybe around $200 in mid to late 2010. So hold that thought if that's the one you want to get. Amazon's Nook is the second best choice if affordability is key. Barnes & Noble has eliminated the Nook's initial kinks, and along with Wi-Fi and 3G wireless connectivity, it has an expansion port for more memory and a color screen that allows you to browse through books and view covers in full color. For portability, buy the Sony Reader Pocket Edition. It's a 6.25 inch by 4.25 inch and less than 1/2 inch thick. It can fit in a small purse or a large jacket pocket. But on the downside, the screen is smaller than screens of the other readers, so it's a little harder to read. So for other alternatives, you could have the iPhone or the iPod Touch as a 3.5-inch screen, can serve as a portable mini e-reader, but you have to make sure you have good vision or your glasses. Engadget tells us that there's nothing groundbreaking in here, but AT&T has just thrown up a good one-page summary of how this whole WWAN or WWAN thing is going down for the new iPad 3G owners. As already known, you'll be paying $14.99 for 250 megabytes or $30 for unlimited data, in addition to free access to AT&T's comprehensive collection of Wi-Fi hotspots. Perhaps the more interesting bits, though, have to do with the plan management of the 250 megabyte setup. Basically, you'll get a warning on your iPad when you get to 20% of your allowance remaining, then again at 10% and filing when you run out. At each message, you'll have a chance to re-up. Of course, if you find yourself browsing through 250 megabytes on a regular basis, you probably want the unlimited plan. Plans renew automatically after 30 days, and you can check your usage at your leisure from settings on the device. Sure, you might be cursing the fact that you've found legitimate reason to spend another $30 every month, but at least you'll be able to set it up, manage it, and make a call to customer service. We're going to take a break. We're going to get to our guest and talk to you about net neutrality and the future of broadband. This is Tom Dioria. We're live on IMI-TechTalk on KFNX AM 1100. It's Sunday, May 2nd, 2010. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to IMI's Tech Talk on KFNX AM 1100. I'm Tom Dioria. It's Sunday, May 2nd, 2010. And as I mentioned before the break, we're going to be talking to you about net neutrality and the future of broadband. Our guest is Tony Bradley. He writes a network column and blog for PC World, providing practical IT insight for business technologies. Tony is also Chief Product Evangelist of Azercon, and hopefully I pronounced that right. He'll correct me, of course. A leading global provider of encryption-based security solutions for protecting corporate data and guarding against internal security threats. Tony is certified as a CISSP and an ISSAP and has been recognized as a Microsoft MVP in enterprise security for the past 4 years. And if you're not a regular listener to Tech Talk, those are big deals. You can follow Tony's writing on PC World's network blog or follow him on Twitter at Tony_Bradley PCW. That's BRADLEY PCW. Tony, thanks again. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks for having me back on the show.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Can you give us a brief definition of what net neutrality really is all about?
Sure. I mean, I guess the biggest example, really, of the issue is the case that was recently decided in federal appeals court between Comcast and the FCC. And this dates back about 3 years to a point where Comcast was intentionally slowing down or impeding traffic on that was intended for peer-to-peer networking. They felt like peer-to-peer networking was eating up too much bandwidth. In order to preserve or improve bandwidth for all of the other customers, they slowed that down. The FCC stepped in and said, well, wait a minute, you really can't tell the customer what they can or can't do. Basically, everyone should be equal. So the principle of net neutrality would be all data should be treated equally, and the ISP should not be able to tell me whether I should do peer-to-peer networking, or if I should, stream a movie from Netflix, or if I should just be getting my email. They should just be, I pay them money, and they give me a pipeline to the internet, and that's it.
Did the decision in the Comcast appeal against the FCC confirm that they don't really have the authority to pursue net neutrality?
Not really. I mean, there was a lot of media attention around that, and a lot of, and particularly the opponents of net neutrality, which, if you want to draw the dividing line, you basically got the Comcasts and Verizons and AT&Ts of the world on one side, they being the broadband providers, and the sort of major corporate players. As major corporate players, they are predictably backed by the Republican Party. So that's one side of the fence. The other side of the fence are more of the content providers, and I guess the biggest player on that side would be Google, who has a vested interest in not in having an open internet. I mean, they don't want anything to get slowed down. They want everyone to be able to access all of the various Google sites equally. So in that decision, or following that decision, the opponents of net neutrality waved flags and threw confetti and drank champagne because they said, hey, this proves the FCC does not have the authority to tell us what to do with our network. But the reality is, all the appellate court really decided was that the FCC did not have basically it was a specific instance. They weren't saying that the FCC has no authority or that the FCC can't still pursue net neutrality. They were really just saying, in this particular case, for this instance, with Comcast, that the way the FCC went about trying to sanction Comcast really was outside of the scope of their authority, and that, based on that specific instance, Comcast won. That's not to say that if the FCC had it to do over again and they did it correctly from a legal and procedural basis, that they couldn't still impose sanctions against Comcast if the same situation arose again.
So why do you feel that since we have broadband, we can't let free market drive things? I mean, do you understand what the motivating factor is there?
Well, it's been one of the big arguments, really, because the corporate players and the Republican Party in particular are big proponents of free market capitalism and just let the market decide, and the government shouldn't step in and tell them how to run their business because we as the consumers, of course, get to choose with our pocketbooks. And so if we don't like the way Comcast is throttling peer-to-peer networking traffic, well, we can just go do business with AT&T instead. On some level, that makes sense. And if you're in a metropolitan market where you can actually choose between Comcast and AT&T, that makes some sense. But there are many areas throughout the United States that are not serviced by these players, or if they are, they're only serviced by one. So they don't have a choice. And, or they may not even have broadband access at all. So, aside from the net neutrality issue, the FCC is really aggressively working this year. Usually, the FCC, all you ever hear from them on is, if Janet Jackson has a wardrobe malfunction, you hear about the FCC. Other than that, they never really seem to do that much. But under the current chairman, Julius Januszowski, they've really been much more aggressive in pursuing the growth and expansion of broadband, and really just trying to be proactive about the future of the internet and broadband communications in the United States. Congress basically asked them to come up with a plan, which they've done, for how to expand broadband. Well, part of that is providing broadband access to those rural areas where the market, left to its own devices, probably wouldn't service. There isn't enough money in it. AT&T and Comcast aren't going to go lay, cable between a metropolitan area and, rural Montana, because there aren't enough customers there to make it worth their while.
So is that why you feel broadband providers are opposed to this?
Well, that's a very small piece of it, because the flip side of that is that the reality is that if you take the entire population of the United States, most of that population does live in metropolitan areas or the outlying suburbs of those metropolitan areas. So even if the broadband providers are only servicing those metropolitan areas, or the greater metropolitan areas, they're getting most of the country in some way, shape, or form. But the other issue, aside from those rural areas, is whether or not they really are competing, and whether or not there really, is any competition, because they seem to sort of kind of rest at the status quo. Like Comcast and AT&T kind of offer the same things at sort of the same price, and the choice really isn't that great, and nobody is out there really pushing the envelope. The FCC has proposed ensuring that at least 100 million Americans have access to 100 megabit per second broadband access by the year 2020. To some, that sounds great. It's like, oh, wow, 100 megabits per second, that's phenomenal. Meanwhile, you've got Google, who is working on rolling out a pilot test in select cities of 1 gigabit per second. And again, Google has a vested interest in pushing the envelope and increasing those speeds. And so it just shows kind of the difference where the FCC is trying to push for 100 megabits per second, and they're getting pushback from the industry because the industry doesn't want to. They don't want to have to invest any more than is the bare minimum necessary to maintain customers. They're not interested in.
Tony, hold that thought. We have to take a break. This is Tom DiOrio. We're live at IMI's Tech Talk on KFNX AM 1100. It's Sunday, May 2nd, 2010. We're talking to Tony Bradley of Net Neutrality and the Future of Broadband. We'll be right back after these messages, so please stay tuned. Welcome back to IMI's Tech Talk on KFNX AM 1100. I'm Tom DiOrio. It's Sunday, May 2nd, 2010. Net neutrality and the future of broadband is our topic today, and we're talking to Tony Bradley. And I had to cut him off because we were talking about something that Google's doing, and I'd like to find out a little bit more about that. 1 gigabits per second, where are they trying that out?
Well, it hasn't been announced yet. They basically put it out there, and they said they're going to pick a handful of cities. Cities from around the country have applied to be the pilot city because they want Google to test that infrastructure out in their area. Topeka, Kansas actually renamed themselves Google Kansas temporarily to draw attention, which Google then turned around on them on April Fool's Day by renaming Google Topeka.com. So, there's a little, sort of a funny back and forth there. So it hasn't been decided, but really the main point there was just that the United States is really kind of lagging other developed countries, other modern internet-enabled countries in terms of both the speed and availability of broadband.
When you go to Japan, everybody's got everything. I mean, you get wireless wherever you are, whether you're in a subway, on a high-speed train, sitting in a park. I'm sure broadband's the same thing, but there the model's somewhat different because it's a monopolistic Docomo country where one service provider provides to everybody. So I don't know what the government regulations there are. I think a lot of this personal opinion, a lot of our problems are because we broke up AT&T. Now we've got all these little companies, and they sort of compete and don't compete. And one of the things that I was talking to you during the break about, last week when I was out in Chicago, I met with the chief information officer out there, Haddock Bott, and he was talking about Mayor Daley's initiative to bring computing, I don't want to necessarily say broadband, but to every citizen in the city. And they're having a problem just in that small geographic area, getting it to, I guess, depressed areas where the vendors don't see the economic return on spending the money to bring it out there, which I think parallels what you were saying is to bringing, that to Billings, Montana. So how do you see the government's involvement in this, either fixing it or addressing it? I mean, are we going to have a government-run broadband company, or are they going to
I really
force
all that
the broadband companies to do something?
Yeah, well, I was saying I really hate all the sort of fear-mongering that goes around about government-run this and government-run that. In this instance, and for the example that you were just discussing, I would say there is a role for the government, whether it's the Chicago city government or the Illinois state government or the federal government. There's a role for somebody to step in and not mandate, no one necessarily needs to come in and tell AT&T or Comcast you will do this, but provide some incentives, work with them, But as long as that's not happening, as you suggested, there's very little financial incentive. I can understand why AT&T or Verizon or whoever wouldn't want to invest in infrastructure into, very low-income urban areas, because, you might have a higher rate of people, defaulting on bills or a higher turnover of people constantly switching accounts or whatever. There are issues involved there, but at the same time, you can't ignore the value of the internet in providing knowledge and education and giving people access to resources. As long as there isn't internet access, at any speed in some of these areas, it increases the digital divide. It increases, the haves from the have-nots. So I don't think the FCC mandate anyone to do anything per se. Really, ultimately, I think that AT&T, Verizon, Comcast, all these major ISP and broadband players will benefit. As much as they're fighting against this, ultimately they'll benefit because if and when the FCC is successful in convincing Congress to approve and fund its plan, the FCC isn't going into the ISP business. They have to give that money to somebody. So they're going to turn around and go to AT&T and say, hey, Congress just gave me $10 billion to run broadband to the south side of Chicago. Would you like the $10 billion? Sure.
Okay, so you think this is something that the government can solve by enticing, paying? I don't know what the right word is here.
Yeah, well, I think it's a little bit of all of the above. Julius Genachowski, from the beginning, has not framed this as a mandate or as a sort of totalitarian push from the FCC to run things. He's framed it as, we have a problem as a country. Let's talk about what that problem is, and let's take input from all parties to figure out what the solutions are, and let's move forward together to implement those solutions. And so when people get all bent out of shape and say, well, the FCC is overstepping their bounds, and the FCC this and the FCC that, my response is the FCC is just asking for your input. They want to work. They want to work with the ISPs and the broadband providers, and so that's just one suggestion. But
going back to the earlier question, framing it around that, then why would these guys oppose it if they're not being forced into something and they're going to get money or rewarded, for laying the lines? The big expense here is laying the fiber to the locations that don't have it now. If the government's going to subsidize it or, in fact, pay you to do it, I'm assuming that this is an assumption because I don't know. If I don't have to run the wire to Billings, Montana, or the heart of Chicago, well, I'm paid for running it. I don't have to take it out of my investors' money, and the wire is there, and then I give access to people that normally would not have it, and so they don't pay me the $30 a month that I'm charging them for it. What other expense would I have as a broadband provider other than laying the line? I mean, isn't that something that's just, I don't want to say pure profit because I'm sure there's expense, but because they have switches back at the central office and stuff. But I would see that, to me, that seems like a great incentive to these broadband companies. Now their network is N times larger than it was, current technology, assuming that that's what they put in the ground. Why do they have a problem?
They say they want the ability to manage their network, for the benefit of the greater good. So, you don't want to have like 1% of your customers eating up 90% of your bandwidth, be it with peer-to-peer networking or whatever. And they don't want there to be guidelines. I'm dealing strictly right now with the net neutrality side. They don't want there to be guidelines that sort of tell them how to manage their network. On the broadband side, that one I'm not really sure because I agree with you. I think that it's just sort of short-sighted because I think their reaction seems to imply they believe they're going to be put on the hook to pay for all of this stuff. I just don't see that happening. What I see is the FCC trying to come up with a plan, which they then have to go to Congress to get funded, and when they get that funding, they have to dole it out to the existing broadband providers. And so, in my mind, the broadband providers stand to gain from this broadband expansion.
I agree with you. But on that note, we're going to take a break. This is Tom DiOria. We're talking to Tony Bradley about net neutrality and other things and the future of broadband. Sunday, May 2nd, 2010. We're on KFNX AM 1100. We're going to take a break. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to IMI-TechTalk on KFNX AM 1100. I'm Tom DiOria, and it's Sunday, May 2nd, 2010. We're talking to Tony Bradley about net neutrality and the future of broadband. Tony, before we get back to the topic and before my producer yells at me, can you tell us a little bit about what being a chief product evangelist is all about and what your company does?
Sure. As far as Decurion, as you mentioned at the outset, Decurion is an encryption company. Our products are all about protecting data, whether it's at rest or in motion, and guarding against insider threats, basically preventing users, whether intentionally or unintentionally, from, say, emailing or transmitting sensitive information. And so my role as chief product evangelist is basically to promote and market what we do. A lot of what I do is to handle the social networking and blogging aspects of the company. But that's basically what Decurion is all about. And then, as you mentioned, also at the outset, I do the network column for PC World in the PC World Business Center, and you can follow me on Twitter at Tony_Bradley PCW, and that's that.
And is that how they can get in touch with you if they want to follow up on this or anything else?
Absolutely. Anyone who's following me on Twitter can send me a tweet. They can direct message me on Twitter. They can also email me at Tony_Bradley at PCWorld.com. Okay,
let's go back a little bit to what you mentioned at the beginning. The FCC has a media access project. Terry wanted to know if you could give her a little bit more information about that.
Well, Congress asked the FCC to sort of analyze where we're at as a country. We have issues with wireless broadband that we're sort of running out of spectrum, and since the advent of the iPhone and all the subsequent next generation smartphones like the Verizon Droid or the Nexus One and those types of things, data consumption on wireless broadband has gone up significantly. And so basically Congress said, well, look, we want you to go take a look at what's going on now, project where we need to be, and then let's figure out how to get from point A to point B. And so that's basically what they did. So there was a period of gathering input and comments. They put together their broadband, national broadband plan for America. That can be found out there on the FCC website, and that was really, a lot of people treated that like that was the end all. Like once the FCC wrote that report that we were done, really that was just the beginning, because all it is a framework of suggestions. And now really the debate is really getting fired up between those who are opposed to the broadband expansion, or those who really favor it, and how to go about it. And starting last month and through this month and into next month, I think the FCC has something like 60 different hearings and meetings scheduled to try to hammer out those details and figure out what to do next.
Now, Tony, if people want to find out more about this, should they go on your blog, or is there an FCC site that they can go to, or do they call their congressperson? How does that, if people want to somehow get a little bit more proactive here?
Certainly, you can go to the FCC site, and as I said, you can get the actual plan. You can also go to the sort of the newsroom or the press release link within the FCC site. Stay up to date on basically all of these various meetings and all the things that they're putting out there. You can also go to my blog on PC World because I've been covering the FCC and the broadband issues for 6 months now. So I have a number of articles sort of chronicling the progression of where things are going and what the different arguments are for each side.
Okay, let's talk. We have a couple of minutes left, and I just want to talk about some of the economics of this based on what you've been reading and what there are obviously two sides here. I gather, based on our discussion today, that you feel this is something that not only would enhance the United States in terms of allowing broadband to reach many more people, but would also increase how these broadband providers reach out in terms of technology. So it seems like it would be as we were talking about again during the break, a win-win for everybody. I'm just trying to grapple with where people see the downside here.
Well, I am definitely, I'll just state flatly that I am in favor of net neutrality, and I'm in favor of the broadband plan. Part of the reason I'm in favor of net neutrality is because while the broadband broadband providers and the ISPs claim altruism and say that they just want to be able to control their networks and yada yada, I still see them as serving their profit margin and their shareholders first and their customers second. And I see it as leaving the door open for them to discriminate and favor certain traffic over others. And then you could start selling that access. You could basically say, or let's say Comcast. Comcast is purchasing NBC. So maybe they make streaming NBC video faster than streaming ABC video, and things like that. So I would much rather see, net neutrality guidelines put in place that say, look, just leave the bandwidth alone. But there have been actually, it's kind of boiled down to an economic argument recently because both sides have put out reports claiming that their side has economic advantages or whatever. So there's a report that says if we impose net neutrality, it's going to cost the ISPs millions of dollars and we'll lose thousands of jobs. And then there are reports on the other side that say, well, the exact opposite.
Okay, Tony, thank you very much. I appreciate you bringing this to everybody's attention. I think it's something that requires watching, and we'll have you on the show. Is there a time frame here for when they're going to start doing stuff or making decisions, or is it really right now in the analysis stage?
Well, a little bit of both. There are pieces of it that the FCC feels that they've already got the authority and the jurisdiction to impose, and they've started taking action. And then there are other parts that are still up for debate. So, certainly I think you're going to see things unfold over the next few months.
Okay, Tony, thanks again for being with us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
I want to thank Terry Ruggiero, IMI's president, Dave Brandon, and Jose Batista for the Week in Review, Eric Johnson, our producer, and our executive producer, Matt Campagni. Thanks again for listening, and please don't forget to tune into Tech Talk next week at 6 p.m. in New York on KFNX AM 1100. Remember to send us your suggestions for future shows or ask us questions by sending an email to techtalk@imi-us.com. Have a great week, and thanks again for listening.